Hey everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar. This is always my favorite part where you get to watch all the people show up. Love it.
And we'll mention this in a few minutes, but if you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat as we're waiting for other people to join, that would be great.
The trick is you have to change your chat from panelists to panelist and attendees. Love to know, introduce yourself, say where you're dialing in from today. Love to learn about where everybody's coming from. Awesome. We've got North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas. We've got London, across the pond. Welcome, Niru.
Maryland, Milwaukee, Midwest representing. Good.
Chicago's always here. Georgia.
Scranton is real. All right, so we'll give it about one more minute. Got a lot of people in already. Maybe we'll get a few more here.
Love it. Just some housekeeping as we're going. We love to see chat. Keep the chat coming as we're going. We'll monitor that and read it. There's also a Q&A section. So if you have an official question, you want to make sure you get our attention, feel free to drop it in the Q&A. Bill and I are going to monitor the Q&A as we go through this. We're going to take some of the questions sort of live as we go, but we also want to save time at the end for questions as well. So feel free to engage in the chat the whole time with each other, with us. But if you have a specific question you want us to answer, make sure you drop it in that Q&A box so we get a little notification that we need to look at it.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and kick us off here. So hello, everyone. Welcome to our all new A2 Analytics in Action series. So this is going to be a new thing for us. It's going to feature short how-to webinars focused on specific topics that are, of course, related to data and that are interesting to association professionals. So the format's going to be 30 minutes of content, and we'll stay over for questions and answers as needed. As always, Greg mentioned, your participation is highly encouraged. So we're here to kind of like drive the discussion. We'll seed some interesting topics, teach you a few things, but the goal really is for all of us to learn from each other. So we welcome and encourage your participation. So today we're kicking off with one of our favorite topics. It's member retention. So we're going to cover how to track it over time, how to look at member retention calculations, and then we're going to talk about how we use this to improve our business. All right, so I'm Bill Conforti, Senior VP of Strategy and Solutions with A2. You might have seen me on some of our other virtual discussion webinars. So I'm going to moderate today's discussion, and I'm joined by Greg Pollock.
Thanks, Bill. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Greg Pollock. I'm the Vice President of Sales here at Association Analytics. I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about our platform today, and I'm going to show you how we calculate retention, but also we're going to answer a lot of questions because we think calculating your retention rate's not enough. We think there's a lot more behind the scenes that you're going to want to unpack once you sort of get to that first metric. So today we're going to cover a lot of things. We're going to cover who is Association Analytics. Believe it or not, this is a popular question we get coming out of our webinars is who was that presenting? So we're going to cover that today. We're going to do some poll questions and get some feedback from you. We are going to answer the question, how do you calculate retention? We're then going to break down that question because we think there's a lot behind the scenes. We're going to jump into some product today and show you how we calculate retention in Acumen, but we're going to show you meaningful ways to use your retention rate analysis once you have it. We're going to do some key takeaways, and obviously throughout the whole process, we're going to be doing Q&A. I also want to circle back on something Bill said. We launched this how-to series based on your feedback. We've been running webinars for a while with you all, and we were getting a lot of really great questions. We were getting a lot of follow-up after those webinars with deeper questions. We're doing this in a response to the questions you all asked. So what we'd love from you is feedback. Is after this, we're going to send you a form to fill out. Tell us what you thought. Tell us if we went too deep or not deep enough. Tell us if there are other things you want us to unpack with you and talk about. So let's get to the first question we often get is who is Association Analytics? So we're a software company based out of Arlington, Virginia, that's exclusively focused on helping associations with a big challenge they run into, which is their data. Helping associations tackle their data from a number of standpoints. One is pulling all that disparate data into a data lake and a data warehouse. Two is visualizing the data, making sure that your data is telling a story. And then importantly enough with that is helping you make sure your data is successful. So data cleanup, data quality, data governance, all of those things wrapped into it. And then as we're going to unpack today, it's not just knowing the answers to your questions, how do you implement them? So we spend a lot of time working with our partners, but also just working in the industry with sessions like this to help educate people on really being a part of a culture of analytics. It's not just looking at the dashboards and the numbers, it's how do we use these to make better decisions? And this is what we focus on.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and get into things now with the first poll question. So the question here is, for those of you that are calculating retention, how often is that done? So is it annually, quarterly, monthly, maybe on request, some never, or maybe you don't know? So we'll give you about 30 seconds or so to make a choice there. We'll quickly look at the results.
Bill, as we're waiting for people to fill out their answer, I'm going to admit something. I used to think that your AMS just told you your retention rate. And I didn't really understand what a complicated process this was until I started here about 2 years ago. And I've been asking associations this very question: how do you calculate it? How often do you do it? And I've heard a ton of different answers. So I'm excited to hear where our attendees today are coming from. Is this something you have your finger on the pulse of? Is this something that you're doing once a month, once a quarter, once a year? Is this something that you just don't know what your retention rate is? All of these are acceptable answers. We find associations fall across the entire spectrum here.
All right, let's go ahead and put up the results. There we go. Okay, so most of us are doing it monthly, few annually, few quarterly. Really glad to see that almost none of us are doing it never. A few on request, and if you don't know. Okay, so monthly is the most popular, and that's what we would expect there. So we'll talk a little bit more about why that's a good idea to do that. So let's go then to next question, and we'll go through this one fast as well. So this is one of those questions where you agree or disagree, or you're neutral on it. So think about the following statement: our association can easily calculate member retention and take action on the results. Strongly agree to strongly disagree. Let's make a choice along that spectrum, and we'll give you about 30 seconds, and we'll look at the results here.
Keith here jumped in and said he's worked at several orgs, and everybody calculates it a different way. There hasn't been a consistent way to calculate retention rate at the different associations he's worked with. And I think we're going to get into that today, that there's a formula to calculate it, but how we arrive at the numbers that go into that formula is variable based on a lot of things in your association. And we're going to talk about those things today, because that matters. How you get your numerator, more importantly, how you get your denominator on that formula really matters on how your business is set up.
Yeah, we've got Michael in the chat calculates retention daily. So that's
kudos.
That's one. Yeah, really. Congrats. That's one we don't see too often. Okay, let's take a look at the results. Okay, disagree. Yeah, so that's the wording of that question was a bit loaded, right? Because we had to be able to easily calculate it and be able to take action on the results. But it looks like most of us are in the middle, right? We're kind of neutral on it, but a lot of us disagree with that, right? And so that's kind of the focus of what we're going to do, and with the rest of today's webinar, is try to get you comfortable with the idea of being able to calculate that, give you some tips on how you can get to the point where, if you are doing it, but it's with great effort, how you can get to a point where you're doing it more easily. And then, of course, ideas on how you can take action on those results. All right. So what are some of the challenges, right? So we know that, retention is top of mind for a lot of associations, for most associations, that retaining a member is cheaper than acquiring a new one. For most of us, our members are still the member dues are still our primary source of revenue, right? And so aside from Michael, right, who's doing this every day automated, a lot of us still don't still don't really understand, how to effectively calculate retention and leverage that data, right? So why don't we do a better job of that? And so here's a couple of the reasons. And so the first one, our processes are inconsistent and they're manual, right? So Michael's able to do it every day because his processes are automated. And so if you are compiling the data for retention, it comes from your AMS, it comes from other places as well. And if you're doing that manually, that's inconsistent and it's error prone, right? So there's that element of the process, and we really deal with that when it comes to any kind of data. But with retention, there's also the process of actually going through and dropping the members, right? So the members reach their end date, and maybe they reach the end of the grace period, then you actually have to go through a process of dropping them. In some associations, it's manual, and I've seen cases where they just kind of delay or even sort of just put the process to the side because it's so cumbersome, and they're just kind of hoping that members will come around and renew those members. So secondly, it's not accessible, right? We all have trouble getting data out of our AMS or other key source systems at times. Sometimes it is accessible, but we just don't trust it, right? There can be a lot of reasons for this. It can be low quality data. It's not updated often enough. Things like that. We may not know how to calculate, right? Or when we do calculate it, we feel that it's inaccurate. So we're definitely going to talk about that in the next few minutes here. And then finally, no one uses it, right? We calculate it, but the executives are not doing anything with it, and so we stopped, right? So we hear that a lot. Okay, so calculating retention is really simple. The hard part is actually getting the data. But once you've done that, it's really just a matter of the count of individuals or organizations that renew their membership, divided by the renewal pool. And so we're going to get into what is the renewal pool, but basically those are all of the members whose membership was expiring, right? So those are the ones that are eligible, for renewal. And so the renewal pool is, again, it's all those that are eligible, and generally we choose them in 3 ways. And as long as you do it consistently, there's no real right or wrong way to do that. You do it by active members, right? Which means members that are active as of a year ago this month, what percentage of those renew their membership. By end date, this is the best way. This is the way we recommend, which means if Greg and I have end dates this month, then we count in the renewal pool for this month, right? And then by start date is, one where you use the start date, and it's almost like the end date, except it doesn't respond very well to cases where your member year is not exactly 12 months, right? So multi-year memberships or promotions or things like that. So if you haven't done this already, if you're not really tied to any specific way, we highly recommend that you use the end date as your means for evaluating who's in your pool. Right? Really quick, key questions for calculating retention. Which segments should be excluded? What are the relevant life cycle definitions? How long is your grace period? What is the process for terminating members? And then are we talking about members or memberships, right? So who should we exclude? Really, you should exclude anyone or any member that is like a lifetime member, or in many cases, some kind of complimentary free membership that doesn't really reach an end date, or it doesn't really have to be renewed.
So wait a minute. What about like student memberships? Do they count in my pool as well? Because what do they like not renew? They like graduate to professional members. What do I do with that?
Yeah, students are usually counted, even if they're free. And the reason is the transition from a student category to a paid professional membership is very important, and it's a very common area that associations are focusing on to improve. Life cycle, right? You have current members, that's like the most of them. You have renews, you have grace period, you have lapsed members who don't actually renew, and then you have reinstated and rejoins, right? So the names can be different from one association to the next, but essentially they have those life cycle definitions. So for retention, it's really current and grace and renewed or lapsed that are the important ones. The grace period, right? So it's usually 30, 60, or 90 days, and you will see that during that grace period, as those members start to renew that haven't done it by the expiration date, that your numbers will actually improve over that time. And then lastly, members or memberships. And the thing here is there's not always exactly one membership per individual or per organization. So you might have chapter memberships or other kinds of overlapping, and you need to be clear on what you're talking about if you're talking about a retention of a membership or a member.
So what if my members renew on a join date, or what if my members renew on a calendar date? Does it matter how I calculate retention? Because if I'm doing it based on the pool, I get it. This month, these members are expiring, but if everybody expires January 1, isn't everybody in my pool? How do I do that?
Yeah, so a lot of times everybody, the pool would obviously be much bigger if you're on anniversary renewals. And so what you'll see there is you really only have to do it if you do it fewer times per year. So you do it once on the big anniversary date, and then you look at it again over the course of your grace period, and you will see those numbers tick up over those over that 3 months or over that 60 days, and then it should remain relatively constant throughout the year. However, you do have to keep in mind that you will have new members, you will have reinstatements and rejoins. So it's important to keep up with those throughout the year, so that when you go to establish your pool for the next year, you can do that correctly.
What if my members are people, and what if my members are companies? Is the formula different? Are the variables different? What changes if that's the case?
Yeah, great question. So it doesn't change. The formula is the same. You still have to figure out your pool, and you still have to know how many renewed. However, obviously our trades that are on the call, they know that you're dealing with oftentimes with a lot of flow down membership. So individuals that are getting benefits from the organization. And so the stakes are a little bit higher, right? So every member you lose is a lot of additional non-dues revenue beyond that actual transaction.
All right, morbid question, but I only ask it because it comes up, is what if a member passes away? Do they not renew? Does that impact my retention rate? How do we handle that? And in the chat, if you've had that experience, what do you do?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say this is the only way, but the way that we handle that in Acumen is the membership is terminated in the month the member passes away. So they are counted in the renewal pool for that year, but in no years beyond that. And you don't want to do anything like delete the record or anything, because they have a lot of historical data, membership transactions, and other things that you want to preserve. But usually in the AMS, there's some kind of a flag or designation that marks them as deceased, so you don't continue to email them and things.
All right, Keith asked a really good question, and this gets into life cycles. What if a member drops, but then several years later they reinstate? His organization doesn't change the start date to their new start date because I started back then. How do we handle that? Is that data governance? Is that life cycle definitions?
Yeah, that's in most cases that would be called a rejoin. And then so their life cycle status would be rejoin, and they may fall into a different pool based on the date that they rejoined versus the date that they originally started.
Love it. So I think so far we've given you the formula. A bunch of people agree in the chat. That's the formula they're using. We talked about the numerator there, how many people renewed. That's pretty easy to get. We talked about the pool, and we talked about different ways to calculate the pool. So if you give an executive a number, they're going to ask a follow-up question, right? So you give the executive who's running membership, you say, hey, I've calculated retention. Success. Here is our retention rate. They're going to ask more questions. So now they're going to say, and imagine you got your Excel spreadsheet. You're calculating this annually, right? Good to go. Here's my number. Hey, can you calculate that monthly? I can. It's going to be a little bit more work. So I get 12 columns instead of one now, and I'm calculating my retention rate monthly. But then we get questions like, well, what if I want to know my retention rate by member type? Okay, so now we have 12 columns with 4 different rows of them because we have 4 member types. What about by period or time frame? What about by demographics? How do I understand these members? Now I've got multiple tables with pivots. Then I want to understand behavior. What about members who do this behavior over here? Come to my trade show in this other software, use my community in this platform over here. Now we're asking multiple departments to tell us which members did that behavior, and I put that into my Excel spreadsheet. We get asked questions a lot like, do first-year members renew at a higher or lower rate than second-year members? What about their engagement score? And hopefully you're starting to realize that Excel may not be the right place to be calculating your retention rate, right? We might need a platform. We might need a tool for this. we understand that the number itself is very important, but the breakdown and the details of that number are even more important. So Bill and I want to show you how we do all of that inside of our platform, Acumen. Bill, you need to stop sharing, and I will start sharing. Fantastic. All right. So if I hit the buttons right, can you see membership over here, Bill? Fantastic. So what we're looking at here is Acumen, a web-based platform. We have a module to help pretty much everything, and we're going to be doing how-to series on a lot of these. Today, we're really talking about membership, and I'm just going to pick individual membership, but we can do trade and hybrid as well. And in membership, we answer a lot of questions about membership. We're going to be using some of the data points like current members, new members. We talked about grace period and drops, but we're going to jump right into our retention rate because we want to be able to calculate that, and we want to be able to answer questions about your retention rate. So first up, my retention rate is 81%. Good news. However, you'll notice I have different member types here. Different member types have different retention rates. So looking at each one of my member types, I now need to understand the retention rate of that specific member type. The idea here is if there's a leaky bucket, I need to find out where that big hole is so I can patch that hole. Now we can make this a little bigger and start to see more details in it. Here, we're just giving you a year-over-year summary of it, but that's not good enough. As we talked about, we might want to calculate that on a quarterly basis, on a monthly basis. This is where we can drill down and get one level below this, where now we can see month-over-month details about our retention rate. Bill talked about those numbers behind the scenes, and we can even say, show this as a table to back this up with the numbers. Now, as we were getting ready for this, we thought it was interesting. You know, some months, our pool was bigger than other months. We are expecting more members to renew in that month. We're expecting less members to renew next month. Our retention rate may stay steady, but the number of members we anticipate joining or renewing in each month is going to go up or it's going to go down. We're also doing that by different member type. So we're breaking down those numbers. What's the percentage? What's the renewed count? So how many people renewed? And what's that pool look like? How many people potentially could have renewed based on all those rules Bill talked about? Now that we've got the math set up, I mentioned, you know, we give the executive the number, they're going to ask some more questions. What about if we were able to look at age, at gender, at job level? Do members that are executives renew at a higher or a lower rate than members who are managers? What about the pool behind that? It doesn't look like we have as many managers, but looking at my retention rate, I can see the numbers behind it. How does that change if they're executives or not? So then we start to get into some of the more important things like member category or member type. We want to start to analyze all of this sort of stuff. Bill mentioned renewal group. Do you renew at the national level or do you renew at the chapter level? We might want to measure tenure. When do our first-year members renew? What's their retention rate versus second-year member retention rate versus third-year member retention rate? Is it true that retention increases as length of membership and tenure increases? And then we want to get into some really interesting things like, what if you use my online community? I always believe that people in the community renew at a higher rate, but can we prove that? Can we back that up in the data that on a regular basis, people who are using our community have a higher retention rate than people who don't use our community? This is a great justification to double down on your community, increase the budget, hire an additional community manager. What about certifications? If a member is certified, are they more likely to renew because they want to hold that certification or not? This goes into an area that analytics typically helps out with, which is validating or breaking tightly preconceived notions. I was told that certified members renew at a higher rate. That's why we've been pushing so hard to get people certified. Well, the question is that actually true in your data? Is that something that's working or is that something that's not working? So now we want to start to combine our retention rate data with our member demographic data, with our behavioral data. We may even want to leverage some calculated data like engagement scoring or likelihood to do something, some predictive analytic models on here to really to be able to get to that answer, not just what is my retention rate, but how do the different things we do in our association affect our retention rate?
So Greg, I was actually going to ask a question, and I see in the Q&A that Jen is asking the same one. Where does all this data come from?
Okay, that's the key here, is all of this data comes from multiple disparate systems and needs to be blended together. And this is where that Excel spreadsheet becomes really hard. Let's pretend I trust the data coming from my AMS. I've got an easy report. My IT guy sends it to me on a regular basis, and I have access to that data. I'm comfortable with it. We want to start blending additional data sources together to answer that. So things like your demographics, these may come from your AMS. What profile do those people have? Things like the behaviors, these are going to come from those other platforms. If I'm in the community, that's going to come from my community platform. Certifications is going to come from the LMS. Hey, maybe donations comes from that Excel spreadsheet that Kathy has that she emails you on a quarterly basis on who donated to the foundation, and we need to blend all that data together. Now you start to understand the value of the data lake. So the data lake is the place where all of those disparate streams flow together, and just as lakes do, all that water blends together to be able to provide meaning on that data, because we're combining multiple things in one visualization engine.
All right. And there was one other question that came in, which I want to answer is, how do we treat new members in the retention formula? And the short answer is you don't, right? So when they're new, they've just joined, the first time that they're considered for retention, first time that they're part of the pool is at the end of their new membership, right? So usually it's after 12 months. So if I join in November and we have anniversary, renewals, then I'm in the November pool for next year. And so that's when you look at my retentions. That's when I get calculated.
And Paul, we're happy to share all this with you. He's asking in the chat if we can share some of these visualizations we're showing, certainly. So I think we have one or two more slides we want to jump back into.
Okay.
Looking at the clock, we are right on time. That never happens.
All right. So you have to press that.
All right. So I think this gets to the point I was trying to make by showing that it's not just calculating the top line number. And here's where we want you to jump in the chat and tell us. We have some ideas of our own, but now that you know your retention rate, you know the breakdown of your retention rate, you know how behaviors affect your retention rate. What do you do with that? What do you do with the knowledge you've just gained by calculating your retention rate? If you have a good quick story you want to share with us in the chat, tell us an action you've taken after understanding your retention rate. Did you add a program? Did you change a program? Did you increase pricing? Did you decrease pricing? What did you do about that? Let me give you an example that I've been thinking about. What if we knew that members who attended our annual conference renewed at a higher rate? What if we knew that first year membership was the largest hurdle to get members over that first year, got them to be members significantly longer? Would it be worth offering a first year member discount to go to our annual conference? Because while we leave a little money on the table at today's conference, we gain lifetime value of our member over the next 5 or 6 years when they're going to stay with us and they're going to be a member forever. Now, this is something I suspect. We can look at the data and validate, are my suspicions correct? And then we can do an experiment. We can offer first year members a discount at the annual conference, and then we can start to measure the retention rate of members in that population. So this is where analytics gets really fun. Was our decision to offer a discount to first year members good? Did we get those members to renew at a higher level after they attended our conference? Perfect reason to be doing this, because we can affect our retention, we can affect our membership, we can affect our total lifetime value.
All right. Yes, I see that we have a lot of good things going on in the chat. I'm going to go to key takeaways now, but I just want to mention, that we want to get, we said it's going to be 30 minutes. We want to get some of you out of here in 30 minutes. If you have something else to go to, all the additional questions and things will be on the recording, which you'll be able to get access to. And then whoever else is on now and has asked a question, we will answer all of those. And if you have a few more minutes to hang out, we will definitely do that. So to wrap this up, I want to go to some key takeaways. So the first is, be consistent with your approach, or be deliberate, right? Consistent with your ads, with your drop processes and your grace periods. You want to automate that if possible. You need to be consistent with how you determine your pool, right? So any segments that are meant to be excluded, you need to apply those rules consistently, and people stay in the pool that they're initially assigned to, even if they renew early, for example, or if they renew after their date. Next is find a tool, right? And so, yeah, obviously, we have Acumen, but there are other tools out there that can do this. It's not just for the calculation, right? Excel can do that, right? It's much more for the data wrangling and for the analysis. And this is the kind of thing, it's too important to use Excel for, really. I mean, any tool that you invest in is going to pay for itself many times over. So with that tool, you'll be able to track your trends over time. So like with a lot of KPIs and metrics, I mean, retention is not really a point in time sort of a thing. You want to see how you're doing over time. And if you're improving or if you're getting worse in any particular area or member type, you want to be able to monitor that, right? Adding dimensions so you can slice and dice and sort and get those correlations that Greg was talking about. I mean, that is not impossible to do in Excel, but you would you would hate that very, very soon. It'd be very difficult and time consuming, not to mention error prone and all of that. And lastly, don't forget to take action, and make sure that others are taking action if you're the one that's having to prepare the data. Otherwise, it's just information, and that's not as interesting. So one of the actions that you might take, obviously, is evaluate and make some changes in your products and your services. You really should be investing most in those that are creating value, that are driving positive member experience and retention, et cetera. And you should be sunsetting the ones that don't. So we're going to help you figure out how to make sense of all that on May the 19th. That's 3 p.m. There's a link in the chat, or there soon will be, for the registration for the May 19th session. And also there's a link where you can find out more about Acumen if you like what you saw from Greg today. Lastly, and we'll let you go, let us know what you thought of the session. This is really just so we can decide on what we want to present in the future. We want to make sure that remains useful for everybody. So with that, thank everybody for your questions and participation. If you have to go, we hope to see you again in 2 weeks. And if there are those who want to stick around for additional questions and things, we'll be glad to do that.
So we've already got some additional questions here. Tyler's got a good question. When you decide on your pool and then your numerator, you want to ensure that the numerator is purely a subset of the pool. You don't want to include any new or readmitted members, right? So the numerator is only the subset of the pool that decided to renew, correct?
Yes.
All right, so we got a yes, Tyler, yeah. Jen here asked a question, and I kind of answered it, but let's go one level deeper. How are we pulling this data in? Are we just pulling this directly from the AMS through an integration? Is that how we do it?
That's how we do it, yes. And it's not just from the AMS. All of the source system data from the AMS and the community, or et cetera, is done through either a direct integration, or in some cases, there's an existing integration with the AMS with one of those sources, and we can grab the data from there. But generally speaking, it's through a direct integration, and that's a big part of why manually compiling these things in Excel or similar tool is not a good long-term strategy. It's getting started that way is good, but you want something that is automated, and you want dedicated resources handling those things for sure.
All right, we sort of got a 1, 2, 3 punch here. So Ron said, thanks a lot for the session. Thanks, Ron, for joining us. He talked about data wrangling. So I guess we've pulled the data from the AMS, and then there's sort of this wrangling process. Talk to me just for a couple seconds about a data lake, a data warehouse, an ETL process, and wrangling. And then that's going to lead to Alan's question, what if we don't have unique identifiers? So give me a little overview of a wrangling process. We've got the data, it's API into the lake, now what?
Yeah, so the way it works in Acumen is there is a data model, which we've standardized, which we've built through years of experience working with a lot of associations. And in that model, there's a place for all of your membership transactions, all of your events, all of your sales, community, really all of the different things that all the different types of business that associations do. And the magic, or the wrangling, is in the ETL processes, which takes the data from your source systems and brings it into the data warehouse, right? And with some transformations happening along the way. That's something that we have teams of technical guys that focus only on that. I mean, so that's beyond my pay grade to explain how the ETL works. But that's kind of like automating a lot of the data wrangling and the formatting and the validation that you would otherwise have to do in order to be able to do any kind of analysis on that data.
Is transformation, so I think a good example of transformation for my brain might be, when members update their profile, they type in their title and they sort of have 100 different titles they can type in. But in Acumen, when I filter by job level, I only want 4 options. Is that a good example of transformation?
Yeah, that can be. A lot of times it's something even simpler. It's like, well, we don't keep this data in the table that, community brands or Personify says we should. We keep it in another table over here, and we have to be able to, be flexible about how to find that and get it to the right place.
All right, I need to break some bad news to Alan. Bill, Alan here said, how do you cross-reference your AMS profile data, your like renewal numbers, with your community engagement data if there's no unique identifier between the two systems?
Well, it's going to be tough. Yeah, there are some ways to do it. I mean, when we don't have a unique identifier, we try to use a process called fuzzy matching, which is using identifiers that are not quite unique, such as first name, last name, and email address. So we can get partially there by doing that. I guess the other thing that you might be able to do is still cross-reference things, but not necessarily on an individual basis. So you still might be able to do something like, look at retention by member type or something. But even that's going to be difficult without the identifier as I'm thinking through that. So I strike that last part.
How accurate do I have to be with that? And here's my question with analytics. If I have a good idea of the community members and who they are, is 80% of the data good? Do I have to have 100% of the data to blend it together to make meaning? Where does that number live in an analytics world versus a financial reporting world? What would the difference there be? Yeah,
so I mean, I think 100% is, we just don't see that, very often. When you're talking about analytics, it's you're looking for something that's good enough to help you make decisions, right? So, first of all, not every member is going to be in the community at all, right? So you don't have a one-to-one relationship necessarily with those demographics and behaviors that we're talking about. But if the data is not perfect, for this, or even really for other things like profile data, it shouldn't stop you from moving forward with your plans for analytics.
Love it. Let's jump into some of the comments here, Bill. Tina said she'd love to know how long members stay before they leave. Looking at her onboarding process, comparing that with retention rate and comparing that with engagement. And I'm going to push that even further and behaviors. So here's a suspicion I have. Members who perform these behaviors renew at a higher rate than members who don't, specifically first-year members, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say online community participation. If members participate in our online community within the first year, we see an increased rate of retention on first-year members. If you knew that information, you might change your onboarding process and minimize some of the other things that don't move the needle and emphasize some of the things that do, like, hey, you should go join our online community, welcome brand new member. As part of your onboarding, this is important for us. We need you to do this milestone. That reminds me of an ASE case study where they specifically were able to identify that members who use the online community they offer, Collaborate, renew at a higher rate. When they onboard members, what is the first thing they tell you to do? Go join Collaborate, make your first post, introduce yourself, because it's going to have the desired effect of increasing retention. So Tina, you are on the right track. What we need to do is we need to help you get your data and answer the question for you. What is the behavior that's going to cause your members most likely to renew, and how do we emphasize that in your onboarding process?
Yeah, and one thing I would add to that is, we didn't cover predictive analytics in today's conversation, but one of the next things that you'd want to do with your retention is you'd want to predict, right? So understanding historical retention is part of it. Predicting future retention is obviously taking it a step further. I wouldn't be shocked to see that as a subject of one of these talks in the future. But when you look at things that correlate with that correlate highly with retention and ultimately with tenure, with long tenure, the amount of times that I've previously renewed is oftentimes one of the biggest influencers for whether I'm likely to renew this time, right? Which is another way of saying the longer I've been here, the more likely I am to renew this year, right? So once you reach, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, or every association has that number, at least anecdotally, then you tend to stick around for the long haul.
Bill, you used an interesting term there. You said correlation. I also imagine another term we could use is causation. What's the difference, and do I care?
Yes, you definitely do care. So correlation means that two things are related, and when one occurs, the other often occurs at the same time, right? They're correlated. But causation is related to that, but it's quite different in the sense that A actually causes B. And so there's a lot of time, correlation is confused with causation, where that causal link just doesn't actually exist. So you want to be careful about that.
Thanks for joining us. I know a couple of you have to drop off. No worries. I want to talk about one or two other things I saw in the chat that I thought were really exciting. One of our participants today talked about her sales team. So she has a team that looks like they're selling memberships, and they changed the commission structure on memberships to members who remain at least 2 years. It seems like the old model was rewarding dragging anybody through the door versus dragging quality through the door. I really like that concept there of rewarding the team for the activity and behaviors you're looking for. Now, I'd be concerned, how do I calculate all that? How do I know that the members I'm bringing in stay 1 or 2 years? But let's help out our sales team a little bit. If we can give our sales team metrics on what a good member looks like, they can better target them. So I think Bill talked a little bit about predictive analytics, but if we can look at the model and see these types of members tend to be better, sales team, go find more types of people like this, who look like this, and who are interested in these benefits, we can then empower our sales team to go after the right members, to go after the right type of members, as opposed to just trying to drag anybody through the door.
Interesting.
Here we've got one about offering a discount for lapsed members for the last 6 months of the year. We're looking at activating our first year campaign to better engage existing members for the annual conference. What are your thoughts on a discount on renewals? Like if you lapsed and we want you to get back, what are your thoughts on like a win back campaign where we offer you a discounted rate?
Is that a question for me?
Yeah, Bill. I'm asking hard questions today.
Yeah. I mean, conceptually, I think it sounds like a fine idea. When you decide on something like that, you just have to make sure that you put in processes where you can measure the results, right? So the last thing you want to do is offer me the last 6 months of the year for free, only to find that that I don't re-up and start paying again, the next time, right? So as long as you have a mechanism in place to measure the success of that and have specific plans to take action on it one way or the other, I think that's the kind of thing that you should be experimenting with. And if you have the ways to collect the data and to analyze the data, then it should be a big part of how you run your business.
Joshua asked an interesting question here, and I don't know if I fully understand it. He's talking about voluntary and involuntary churn. I don't know if I know the difference between voluntary and involuntary churn.
Trying to find that one.
It's in the Q&A. Joshua, if you could help us out, what is the difference between somebody who voluntarily churns or involuntarily? Oh, yeah. That's Barbara, you're right. Yep. So I would say in the retention rate number, whether you voluntarily churn or involuntarily churn through actions outside your scope, right? COVID, I didn't have the budget, I left. My chapter terminated, I left. MGI does a study every year, and one of the #1 reasons people leave associations is they're not in the industry anymore. I'm not a nurse anymore. I'm not going to be a member of the American Nursing Association. That makes sense to me. I would say it doesn't change the way you calculate your number. You calculate your number based on the agreed math you set up. However, I would say we should take action based on that. And here's a question I would ask is, if we're able to identify that these members churned, right, they did not renew, but all indications said they should renew, why don't we go do a survey for those people and ask them why they didn't renew? Because I think this is going to get to that answer of what's going on with the involuntary renewals. If you didn't renew, but all signs led to yes, I think this is a perfect area to go do a survey and ask those people, why didn't they renew? And it might have been a budget issue. It might have been a timing constraint issue. It might have been that the organization wasn't relevant for what they do now. And I think that answer could tell you a lot about, should we go in a different direction? Should we change or pivot? Is offering a discount really going to move the needle? Or as Bill said, is offering a discount just leaving money on the table and we're unable to measure how successful that was?
Yeah, so someone brought up COVID in the chat. So discounts, that was obviously a good strategy, right? During 2020, especially if and many many customers did have access to COVID data overlaid with their membership data. Then you actually know, like, what are the hard hit areas, and you can be proactive about sending dues, amnesty, or discounts, or things like that, for people that are in, or organizations, that are in particularly hard hit areas. So yeah, so I totally agree with Greg. It's about the actions that you would take more so than the calculation. However, as long as you apply it consistently, if you felt like excluding certain involuntary churn, from your renewal pool made sense for your organization, it's totally valid to do that as long as you're consistent about it.
So I guess that goes back to who do you exclude from the pool? And if your rule says we exclude these types of people for these types of reasons, as long as you consistently apply that, you're okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Talking about consistently applying, what if I want to change my rules for the pool? Do I have to go back and recalculate my retention rate from the beginning of time? Or do we just put an asterisk and say well, we calculated the number differently. Of course it's changed. What happens if I want to change my consistency with my pool?
Yeah, so this is another sort of check mark in the column for why you want a tool to do this, rather than using Excel or similar, or some kind of manual process. If you change the rules for which members are part of your renewal pool, and you want to change that going back with the tool, then you can apply those changes retroactively, right? And that same goes for engagement, right? A lot of people ask about that. What if we want to change our model? So we have a tool for that, and that allows you to change your calculation retroactively going back, for 3 or 5 years or whatever. And you can do the same with retention.
Awesome. I think we covered most of the questions that people asked. Thank you, everybody, for asking great questions. I think we covered all the highlights in the chat. Everybody who chatted, thank you so much. It makes it a lot more fun for us when this is interactive. Hopefully you all get a lot more out of it. Let's do some shout outs to Barbara, to Alan, Tyler here for being participants in our chat, adding lots of valuable content for us. Our secret hidden person here added some posts. If you want to take a look at a blog we wrote with a case study that covers a specific example of this. If you want to do a deeper dive with us and ask more questions, you can always request a demo with us. You can always reach out to us directly. Our email addresses are pretty easy to guess. And we're going to keep doing more of these. We need your feedback, though. We need to know what interesting questions you have. What are the things you're looking for us to cover? What are the nuances of those questions you want details about? Because that's how we're going to proceed with this series. We're using data we get from you to make sure we craft a session that's going to be most on top of what you're looking for. So keep the feedback coming, keep the questions coming. We'll make sure we have more content that's relevant for you in the future. Thanks everybody for joining us and hanging out an additional 20 minutes with us.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.